Welcome back, loyal viewers of the Game Time Decision podcast. It is me, Just Joe, alone. Chris, the Captain Schwarzy, cannot make it, along with many other members, former members of the Game Time Decision podcast and Game Time Sports Network. I know there have not been any podcasts or material coming out of the network in quite some time, but I'm trying to change that. Even if it's just me carrying the load and just trooping along, just like how LeBron carried his team to the finals for so many years. I guess that's going to be me. I guess I'm the LeBron James of local high school / college students doing a podcast. So we're back, and I'm just going to say this will be a strictly basketball podcast. I was coming in thinking, talk a little bit of Patriots training camp, a little bit of Red Sox, but you know what? These rumors swirling around about the Celtics trading the number 1 overall pick, it's just wild. So I'm just going to jump right into this. And, not everything's black and white. So if you look on Celtics Twitter, which is kind of like, it's like a safe haven for these people who just ooze the green, and they just are like, oh, everything's awesome. The Celtics should have beat the Cavs. It was the refs. The Celtics could beat the Warriors. And then you also have like the people who say like everything the Celtics do is wrong. So it's just like a mosh pit of all Celtics fans who want to give themselves a voice. And so it's you got a real good spectrum of what the fan base is thinking. And you have like two camps of fans, and it's like you either keep the number 1 overall pick, anything other than that is awful. And then you have to trade the pick. You have to trade it. You have to trade for a superstar, or you just have to trade back. And I think like anything, there's gray area. So would I be a fan of trading out of the number 1 overall slot? No, unless it's the right deal. So you look at Markelle Fultz, and pretty much from what I hear, I'm not going to lie, I didn't watch any Washington basketball other than clips online. I'm not a college basketball fan in general, and I'm not going to watch a 9-27 team on the West Coast. But from what I hear, he is the consensus number 1 overall pick, but he is not in the class of an Anthony Davis, a LeBron James, a Tim Duncan, like guys who are 100% going to be franchise changers. Not even franchise changers, like the number 1 guy on multiple championship teams. Now, if he turns out to be Kyrie Irving or John Wall, I'm not saying that's his type of player, but I'm just going based on point guards who have been the number 1 overall pick, an all-star player, a guy who can be your number 2, maybe even an all-NBA player, but a guy who can't win a championship as the best player, in my opinion. So, or you hear comparisons to Russell Westbrook and James Harden. I see him more as a James Harden who can probably defend more, but not as prolific offensively. But either way, he is far and above better than any other player in the draft, better than Lonzo Ball, who even if I think the Celtics had like the 8th pick, and if Lonzo Ball slipped, which it wouldn't happen, I think they'd probably still take like Dennis Smith Jr. or Jonathan Isaac if he was there. I just don't think the Celtics want Lonzo Ball, and he's not really a fit with the team. So, but other than that, like, you hear reports saying the Celtics want Jackson, and from what I hear about him is that he's another athletic wing player who can't shoot. And I'm like, how many of those guys do you need? I just see complete redundancy with Jaylen Brown. But I'm going to say I do trust Danny Ainge, and it takes a lot to gain my trust. Bill Belichick, quite frankly, didn't even gain my trust as a Patriots fan until this past year when they won the Super Bowl. Before that, I was doubting him because there were so many moves, and I've written articles about this over the past year and said this many times, and it wasn't until I saw 2 Super Bowls and seen how the Patriot way has worked in this generation, not the early 2000s, but going into the 2010s, how that has not only gotten us to not Eastern Conference Finals, AFC Championship games, but winning titles. And Danny Ainge, even though he's only won 1 title, and just seeing how I doubted him, going back, it was emotional for me. I don't usually get emotionally attached to athletes, but I was to Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett. Those were the players of my childhood. Those were the players who really made me a Celtics fan and really made me excited about this team. So I was a little bit against trading that, especially when you consider how good the Brooklyn Nets were, that I didn't think the picks would be all that valuable. Maybe like eventually thought they'd be top 10, but never in my wildest dreams did I think that it'd be number 3, then number 1, then probably another top 5 pick the next year. So, and then you look at when the Celtics didn't trade this pick for Paul George or Jimmy Butler, and I was saying, well, this pick it's probably going to be 4 or 5, but it ended up being the number 1 overall pick, and now it just opened up so many avenues. So I'm done doubting Danny Ainge, but his draft history kind of leaves something to be desired. But the thing with Danny Ainge, and I hear a lot of people criticizing his drafting, he's never really had a real crack at a top end talent. The highest I think, other than Jaylen Brown, who is obviously we can't get a full read on, even though he's a lot better than I thought he would be, just based on his limited sample size this year. But his top picks, like Randy Foye, wasn't good. He took him instead of Brandon Royer. He traded out of that pick. And Marcus Smart, who could still develop into a solid player, maybe a fringe all-star player, if his shot develops, because he really does impact winning in all ways except when it comes to shooting the ball. But you look at his picks. I mean, acquiring Rajon Rondo in the draft at 21, drafting Tony Allen and Al Jefferson in the mid to late first round, Avery Bradley with like the 19th or 20th pick. So in the NBA, it's hard to really hit on guys if you're not drafting consistently in the top 5. So I don't think Danny Ainge should get much heat for his drafting, especially like you can only do so much. Like you say, oh, he took Marshawn Brooks instead of Jimmy Butler. Well, every team except the Bulls passed on Jimmy Butler that year. So you can't really fault him for that. It's not like the only real criticism I could see is taking Kelly Olynyk 2 slots ahead of Giannis Antetokounmpo. But then again, he slid to 15, and that was a terrible draft. That was a draft where Anthony Bennett was number 1, and Victor Oladipo or Otto Porter, I think Otto Porter was in that draft, but those are like the shining stars other than Giannis of that draft. So can't really fault him there that much. But if you look at what makes Danny Ainge probably the best executive of the past decade and a half, it has been his trades. And I know the image of Danny Ainge is Trader Danny, fearless, but I think Danny Ainge is getting a little afraid. And I think he's afraid not because of job security. Obviously, Danny Ainge has a job for life. And not like, I just think he sees this amazing position he set himself up in. Unless you're the Golden State Warriors or the Cleveland Cavaliers, maybe the San Antonio Spurs. But other than those two teams, and maybe the Spurs, no team is in a better situation than the Celtics. The Celtics literally built from the ground up. And Rajon Rondo, who was expected to be the franchise player, completely fizzled out. And at the time, the Celtics got was what was less than market value coming off the ACL surgery. But now you look, he has a player who blossomed into a second-team All-NBA player in Isaiah Thomas, a guy who I think is one of the most underrated players in basketball in Al Horford. You have Avery Bradley on the last year of a cheap deal. Jay Crowder, who's on a well below market deal. You have Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart. You have the number 1 overall pick in the draft and a potential number 1 overall pick in the draft next year. And I think he sees the end in sight in terms of the Brooklyn picks and the time of accumulating assets. And I think he's afraid because he doesn't want to put all his chips into one player's basket. He doesn't want to put all his chips on the table right now. And I think Danny Ainge's goal is always to make a trade. It's always to acquire a transformational player through trade because he knows he is guaranteed that that player will be the guy to win a championship. There was no doubting, even though the window was short in 2007, that Kevin Garnett could be the number 1 player on a championship team along with Ray Allen and Paul Pierce. There's no doubting that Anthony Davis will blossom. He's only 24 years old, has the talent to be the number 1 overall player on a championship team. There is, even if Markelle Fultz turns out to be great, it's not guaranteed he's going to be James Harden, which is his ceiling. His floor is not Julius Randle. I got Lakers on the brain. What's his name? D'Angelo Russell. That's his floor, I would say. And are you taking D'Angelo Russell, who's another scoring 6'5" combo guard, but at his peak is probably 20 points a game on a bad team and stuffing the stat sheet, but really not impacting winning, as shown by the 9-27 record at Washington? I don't know. So Danny Ainge wants to just keep accumulating assets, not because he wants the picks to make the picks, but he wants to eventually turn that into an Anthony Davis. Or if he can't get Anthony Davis, try to get a Kristaps Porzingis or someone like that. A guy we haven't even heard of. Like, obviously we've heard of the player, but someone who's never been brought up in rumors. Someone where it just comes out of the woodwork. Like, if you go back to 2007, the Celtics were trying to acquire KG for like 2-3 years. So I think that's why Celtics fans have been getting impatient. And I'm not going to say that the Celtics team this year and for the next few years is fool's gold, but they have been referred to as the bridge Celtics, where they're not good enough to compete for championships, but we don't have to tank because we're getting our top picks from another team. So we'll put a competitive team on the floor. Winning 50 games in the NBA is not as hard as it used to be because nearly 10 to 15 teams in the league are actively trying to lose. So as long as you out-hustle them and out-coach them, you're going to get your wins against the Brooklyns, the Phoenixes, as of now the Lakers, the Pistons, and the Bobcats, well, the Hornets. Shout out to the old Bobcats and Michael Jordan as an awful owner/executive. But you're going to get your wins against those teams. So we'll be competitive, and the Eastern Conference is so weak. You win, and you become the first or second seed. You have what should be a cakewalk in the first round. And then the second round, you'll have a competitive series like it was this year. But it'll be winnable because the Wizards, they're talented, but they're not a great team. Toronto, as of now, that team could be blown up, but talented, but certainly not a super team. So you have an easy path to the Eastern Conference Finals. And I think LeBron's window, as great as he is, might be closing faster than people think. Not only because of his age, but because I think of the surrounding parts around him and maybe his willingness to leave Cleveland. After this year, they're saying he could go to LA, probably the Clippers, and get his old banana boat team together with Chris Paul, Dwayne Wade, Carmelo Anthony, which I think would be disastrous, especially with Wade and Carmelo, who I think not only on the back nine, they're like Dwayne Wade's on his last hole, and Melo I think was very overrated all of his career, but he's on the back nine too. So if LeBron's out of the East, or if Kyrie gets hurt, or if they are unable to trade Kevin Love for Paul George, which is now being rumored, which is insane, but I could see how it works because Indiana doesn't want to lose Paul George for nothing. But either way, I think a team, if you look at what the Celtics, let's just say this is what I believe to be the most likely scenario. The Celtics trade the number 1 overall pick to Philadelphia for this year's 3rd pick. They'll draft Josh Jackson, and then they'll get probably the 2018 Lakers pick unprotected. And I would push for that 2019 Kings pick unprotected as well. They're saying it could be a future Philadelphia pick, which I'm not too keen on, especially I've heard Adrian Wojnarowski, who is the best reporter in basketball, saying 2021 Philly pick might be protected, or there are other picks that could be under protection. Let's just say that 2021 pick is unprotected. In 4 years, with Markelle Fultz, Dario Saric if he's not in the trade, Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons, guys who because I don't think Philly's going to be great next year. They're probably going to add another at least top 10 pick. And the way that team's going to go, if you have all those guys in their prime, they might be a championship team in 5 years when the Warriors era is over, when the Cavs are over. So that pick could be near valueless. So I would definitely push for that Kings pick and the Lakers pick. Or if I can only get one of those picks, I'd say Philly, give us the higher of the 2 picks, but you have your own pick and the Lakers pick. Whichever pick is higher between yours and Philly's, and give us the 2019 pick or give us Dario Saric. So let's say you go there. And then what I think the Celtics should do is continue to build for now and continue to build for the future. So you keep Josh Jackson. You still have the Brooklyn pick for next year. Deal whatever assets you get from the Philly trade for Jimmy Butler or Paul George. I think Paul George is better, but I would lean Butler because I think he'd be more willing to stay and he has a better contract as of right now. So there's more certainty with Butler. So, and you sign Gordon Hayward or Blake Griffin. I know I love Gordon Hayward, but if you are to draft Jackson and trade for Jimmy Butler, and you're going to have Jaylen Brown and Jay Crowder, you're going to have a lot of redundancy at that 3 spot, even though there's a lot of positional flexibility. Hayward can play anywhere between the 2 and the 4 in small ball lineups, and same with Jaylen Brown, and Jackson projects as like a 3-4 guy. They're all 6'8", so that's really good positional versatility. But if you get Hayward, or you can sign Blake Griffin, who I think could be the guy who might be able to lift you to beating Cleveland. I think Hayward could, but Blake Griffin is kind of the risk reward. And if you could try to convince him to take a 3-year max instead of a 4-year max, that could be huge. So let's just say you roll. Let's say it's Hayward anyway, and maybe you give up Avery Bradley or Jay Crowder as part of the deal. So you're essentially trading Fultz, the number 1 pick, let's say Jay Crowder or Avery Bradley, for the 3rd pick. So from moving down 2 spots and giving up Jay Crowder, you get Jimmy Butler and the number 3 pick. And that also gives you the financial flexibility to give a full max to Griffin or Hayward, because as of right now, if you renounce the rights to Zeller, Jerebko, Kelly Olynyk, you let Gerald Green walk, and you let Amir Johnson go, you're at about $28 million. So you're still $2 million short of the full max. And that could be enough to sway, because in terms of the max contract for staying with your own team, Gordon Hayward's max with Utah would be about $33 million per year. So a $5 million swing difference could be is a lot. But if you cut that down to $3 million swing difference, it's more palatable for a Gordon Hayward to leave for a better situation. So by moving from 1 to 3, you save $2 million, because the scale for the number 1 pick is like $7 million, and it's like $5 million for like the 3rd pick. So you get to do that without having to stash Zizic or Yabusele for another year, or having to get rid of Terry Rozier or Marcus Smart. So that saves you money. And it really makes sense, especially, and I think it all comes down to this. Does Danny Ainge believe Markelle Fultz is leaps and shoulders above, head and shoulders above everyone else? Is he a clear-cut number 1 guy, or is he like A- player and Josh Jackson's a B+ player, but the B+ player also gets you Jimmy Butler and cap flexibility to sign Hayward or Griffin? And that's pretty much what it comes down to. And it's really an interesting situation. It all comes down to the deal. I heard the Lakers are offering number 2 in Julius Randle. I would laugh at them. Randle, to me, is like Al Jefferson. Puts up good numbers on a bad team. Solid player, but certainly does not have the value of 2 potential top 5 picks. So I'd laugh at them. The only way, I wouldn't even consider dealing with the Lakers, because they don't even have their pick next year. And by 2019, they could have Paul George and along with Markelle Fultz. And so the only trade I guess I would entertain with the Lakers would be the number 2 pick along with like Brandon Ingram, and I don't even know. No other player on that team interests me. As I said before, D'Angelo Russell doesn't interest me, and Jordan Clarkson's making about $12-15 million a year, so he doesn't interest me. So Lakers don't really have much to offer. It's really Philly, because I wouldn't want to go below 3. So it's either Philly or bust. So you have to make the trade if you get 2 potential top 5 picks. Just for the Lakers pick alone to move down 2 slots, not worth it. And so basically I would say my perfect draft night scenario for the Celtics would be you have to wait until the draft anyway, because the Lakers have been rumored to like Jackson. But let's just say this. In a perfect world, the Celtics take Fultz number 1. Lonzo Ball goes to the Lakers at number 2, and then Josh Jackson to Philly at 3. All the picks have been made, and then during the draft, you make the trade. You trade Fultz for Jackson, the Lakers pick, and the Kings pick. And maybe you get Chicago involved. I heard Chicago is interested in Jahlil Okafor. They did give up Taj Gibson last year. And Robin Lopez I think he has 1 year left, but how much can you really rely on him? So they're kind of thin in the front court. So maybe they want Jahlil Okafor for some offense. So Jahlil Okafor, the 2018 Lakers pick, and maybe Bradley or Crowder. I'd probably lean towards Bradley, even though I think he's probably a far better player than Jay Crowder, but because of his contract situation, give up Bradley. So Bradley, 18 Lakers pick, and Jahlil Okafor, maybe Rozier or Smart. You bring in Jimmy Butler. You keep the 19 Kings pick, which I think is really good. So if you could do that, I think that's no doubt perfect situation. So you end up giving up number 1, Bradley, Smart, and the 2018 Lakers pick, and you bring in Butler. So ultimately, you get Butler, Jackson, 2019 Kings pick for the number 1 pick, and Bradley and Smart, which I think is an absolute heist. So that's all I have for the Celtics right now. It'll be really interesting to see how it all unfolds. My only criticism is that the rumors and trade deals reporting coming from originally Zach Lowe, then Mark Stein, and then the guy Adrian Wojnarowski, they came out 6 days before the draft. So that's a little too far before. Would have been nice like 2, at most 3 days before the draft. Get it on a Monday, so then there's more like hype and all the talk shows are on. So on a weekend, on a Friday night, I mean, I don't know. I mean, you can't really control when rumors come out, but I think it'd be better for the networks to have them come out, so then people will be watching First Take and Undisputed and all these shows when they debate this. So that's all I have to say. And nothing gets done till draft night. That's obvious. Even if they have the parameters in place, even if everything is in place right now as we speak. I'm not sure when this will be uploaded, but this is it's Saturday the 17th. And around 3 o'clock, 3:30. So Markelle Fultz is in Philly, and he'll be working out with the Sixers tonight at 6. Canceled the meeting with the Celtics. So I do think this trade goes through, and it all depends on that second pick or player we get from Philly. Whether if it's just, as I said before, just to reiterate, wrap things up. If we get third and the 18 Lakers pick, that's not enough. We need to get either Saric or the 19 Kings pick, or it's a no deal from me. And I think Ainge is really waiting because I saw a report. I think it was from Draft Express, or so many rumors, so many sources. But one credible source with a blue check mark on Twitter said Ainge is looking for a Brooklyn-type heist. I think one extra pick is not a heist. You need a Penny Hardaway for Chris Webber trade. You need to get 3 picks or 2 high-quality picks or a high-end young player. So that's all I have. I trust Danny Ainge, and it's going to be a very exciting draft, offseason, and season, no matter who we get, because we're a good team, and we have more assets than you can believe. So who knows? You wait out the season, you wait out the next 2-3 years for Golden State and Cleveland to go, or you make a run at it now and preserve flexibility for the future. But if you can get Jimmy Butler and Blake Griffin or Hayward, that starting lineup, I think, is enough to take down Cleveland. Maybe not Golden State, but maybe a KD injury, a Draymond suspension, a malcontent Klay Thompson, and you're right in it. And I heard Sean Grande on the Celtics Roundtable podcast, and he brought up the Spurs model, and I think it's very interesting. You don't have to be the best team every year. You just have to be around it. So if you look at, and the 04 Pistons are an example. They weren't the best collection of talent, but there was a weak Eastern Conference that year, and Kobe and Shaq were fighting. They couldn't really figure it out. And the Pistons were a good team. No superstar, but 4 all-star level players, or not even all-star level players. The Celtics would have 4 all-star players, and Isaiah, Horford, Butler, and Hayward, which is better than, I think, that 04 Pistons team. But as long as you're around it, something goes wrong with one of those teams, and suddenly you're in the finals, and who knows? You have a chance to win it. So always be around it. And if you can build a Spurs-type operation for the next 10 to 15, 20 years, where you are never the best team exactly, but especially the later Spurs years, like I think 14 is a perfect example. When you have old Parker, Ginobili, and Duncan, and young Kawhi, they weren't the best collection of talent. I think the Heat were more talented, and I think that was when the Clippers were at their peak in terms of talent, but you never know. So be around it, try to win a championship, preserve your flexibility, preserve your assets, and it's a good time to be a Celtics fan. Signing off from MMTV and Melrose, the best place on earth. This is the Game Time Decision podcast with just me, just Joe, and hopefully we'll be getting back to you next week. Have a good one.